Yeah, let's kick off this Brazilian Shirt Name podcast then. Yeah, welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, live and direct on YouTube, but of course, as a podcast, if you receive us through any of your podcast options. The legendino Tim Vickery, why is it that every time we speak, you insist on exposing your hairy chest? Why? Oh, why? Oh, why?
You have no idea how much I sweat during the course of these things. You know, the back of my
I've got
shirt,
some idea.
the back of my shirt is, it means that I'm so heavy, I'm almost tipping backwards, not helped by the fact that these days I do walk with a slight limp after dropping a book entitled The Ball is Round
Oh
on
my
my
goodness.
foot. It's a
heavy book.
magnificent book,
Yeah.
but don't drop it on your foot.
It's 1,000 pages of drop, and thankfully we've got the author of said book with us, David Goldblatt, professor by now, an academic, of course.
Now and again, sometimes when I'm in America, I'm a professor, but I'm in the UK right now, so I'm just plain old
Dave.
Goldblatt, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, just call me Dave is what I was going to go
for. The plain old Dave is the useful, productive one. The
no,
professor.
David. It's got to be David, guys. Seriously. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as I say, did Dave slay Goliath?
Yeah. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
That'd have been the Monty Python version. They should have done that. Dave and Goliath. They missed the trick. Tim always raves about your book. I must say, the 1,000 pages haven't put me off, but I'm going to need some time, some good old time to read it. But I feel like I know it already. And oh my goodness, it's nearly 20 years since it was first published.
That's right.
I'm sure that it's still, selling year after year, not least because of Tim's recommendations. But genuinely, it's got the best cover of a football book. A very emotional one for me, cover of a football book I've ever seen. So I hope any new 20th anniversary editions are going to keep the cover, which features Pele and Bobby Moore, both late and
really
both great.
Cover. Really, really lovely.
It's kind of what we're all trying to do, isn't it? We're all trying to cling on and find the purity and the essence amidst the dross of the global entertainment industry, and that the photo of Pele and Bobby Moore, you're getting right down to the essence there, aren't you? So that photo is like a symbol of everything that we want.
Yeah, and the aesthetics, the kit they're wearing, it's all unbranded and simple, and black boots, and the Azteca, the Mexican stadiums, they were also unadorned by comparison to today's stadium. So there is a kind of fantastic simplicity about it.
Yeah, for me, amongst the other things is, I remember the moment, live and direct, 1970 World Cup, wasn't it? And it was Bobby Moore's great moment, I suppose, after winning the World Cup, because Pele wasn't in that one. And it was the friendship between them, nevertheless, they clearly respected each other enormously, was something to behold. And it's a moment in sports, isn't it? It's a moment where you say, wow, this is the Jesse Owens moment at the 1936 Olympics, or it's the David Emery moment in the 1968 Olympics, or whatever it might be. Only sport delivers these magic moments, unscripted, yet that speaks for so long, 60 years or 50 something years since that photograph was taken. It says something about the football then, also about the football today, and the football tomorrow. In all of which, magic moment.
All of which makes me slightly surprised and curious to know why the Right Honourable David Goldblatt has chosen the game that he's chosen today. Came out of left field for me, this one. This choice.
Good point. Yeah.
Mr. Goldblatt, explain yourself.
So I think there are three things going on for me here. There's one thing about my own sort of personal story.
We're talking, of course, about Man United against Bayern Munich, the final of the Champions League in Barcelona, May the 26th, 1999.
So I think there's something about my own sort of personal story about my relationship to football, and it comes at a moment which I'll explain, where all the kind of energies and the ideas that eventually would sort of explode in The Ball Is Round are gathering themselves. So I think there's an element there. I think there's as a historian, I think it's a really interesting moment. Partly, you know, something that for so long felt like it just happened yesterday, and then suddenly you turn around and you go, "Oh my, that's a quarter of a century ago."
Mhm.
And what seemed to be so fresh, actually, I look back on it and I go, "Oh, actually, this is another world." And I think that it sits on the cusp of a moment of change between the football that had existed before the Premier League and before digital television, and all of the transformations that occurred. But those things took time. They didn't just happen like that. And actually, 1999 for me is almost kind of the last of the old in some ways. And then the third reason is that it's just unbelievably good drama. You know, there are lots of different 2-1s in this world. I mean, for example, I saw England women win the Euros with a 2-1, where, you know, they've gone ahead, then it's one, then the Germans equalise in the second half, and it goes into extra time, and both sides feel like at any moment they could win, which is a great 1-1, and then you get a fantastic winner, 2-1, and that's one way that a 2-1 can work out. But there's really nothing like you go 1-0 down after 4 minutes, and then literally 90 minutes later you find not just the equaliser but the winner in 3 minutes of additional time. That's a whole different 2-1, and what a kind of unbelievable, amazing kind of narrative story. So those are the 3 reasons. I mean, I can talk, if you'd like me to kind of expand on them, I'd be pleased to.
Well, it's a 3-act drama, and like any, although Shakespeare's were 5 acts, weren't they? But as any dramatist knows, the 3-act drama is the preamble, if you like, the setting the scene, and then there is the the great crisis in the middle. It's not quite the denouement, is it? The denouement is the last act. So let's talk through. I mean, you tell me in whichever way you want to talk about it, historically or otherwise. This
I'll
3-act
start
drama.
with my own sort of personal story on this. I think the first thing to say is in 1999, my daughter is probably just coming up to 2, and there's another one on the way. And one of the things I just remember about watching that game and watching the quarterfinals and the semi-finals that United played, which were also fantastic contests against Inter and then Juventus, I'd cracked getting her into bed and asleep by 7:30, and suddenly one had one's evenings back, and those were really just very special kind of moments just for me, like, oh, okay, I got a couple of hours I could just sit and watch the football and not think about anything else. And that's, you know, over the years, that's one of the great pleasures of football, is to take one out of everyday life and to be in a completely different space. And definitely, you know, the spring of 1999, I'm kind of cracking the basics of parenthood and creating this space in to watch those games. So
that's the first goal. That's the first goal, isn't it? That's the German goal, the Vorsprung technique. You figured out the Vorsprung technique of putting the child
I'd
to bed.
sat down. I'd sat down, got myself all ready to go, and I should say I'm supporting United. You know, I'm a Tottenham supporter, inherited from my father and my grandfather, and you know, the last 20 years I've been in Bristol or is it more than that now? And Bristol Rovers are my local squeeze. But for that spring, I was on that journey with United. I'd watched them in the early rounds, and then I watched them all through the knockout rounds. And it was, I was with them. I was with them, and I wanted them to win. So, having got to that moment and you go 1-0 down to what in retrospect, slightly scrappy free kick that kind of somehow makes its way round the wall in a slightly unconvincing fashion.
Well, it's a goalkeeping error, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Schmeichel, the goalkeeper, number one, you got to take responsibility for your side. If they get it over the wall and in the corner, then sometimes you just got to, say, well done. But if it's your side, it's almost like playing cricket and being bowled by a ball you can't reach because you've backed away so much because you're so scared of them, And Schmeichel is taken those fatal steps behind his wall, and he's left his own corner unguarded.
Yeah. No, it's a terrible error, and the ball kind of slightly bobbles as well. It doesn't go particularly true.
Unclean.
And that's interesting because that speaks to the other issue of sort of history. Is the state of the pitch is not great. It is not the Bowling Green snooker table of the 21st century. I mean, nor is it, of course, a muddy day sometime in the 1970s or a late season grassless pitch of the 1980s. But it sure as hell isn't what we see today. And I also noticed, looking at the at highlights, it's got a very unusual for today, unconventional mowing pattern that are sort of diagonal. It's slightly like,
it's everything.
You're allowed today. You can't do that. Certainly not in the Champions League. Certainly not in the Premier League. And again, that's kind of interesting that the powers that be, both UEFA, the leagues, and indeed the broadcasters, insist on a certain level of standard of the pitch that would have been inconceivable in 1999. And that's what I mean about it's still slightly something of the old rather than the football of today in it.
Yeah, I was fascinated when you said that, because I would look down a team sheet and I'm thinking, there's quite a few players here who come from that age before there was a Premier League, isn't it?
Yeah, there are people who played, and just look at the makeup. Bayern München has in its opening 11, it's 10 Germans and Sami Kufur. Like, when was the last time that happened?
Well, remind me to tell you about why I remember this game afterwards. Please remind me before the end of this podcast, because it's got to do with Sami Kufur. We'll come to that
his
later.
Reaction at the end, but we've got to get there. We've got to get there first.
Yeah, there's a journey to go on first.
What your support for United?
Yeah,
was this just based on the fact that they were an English club? Any special affinity with United?
I think I had warmed to Ferguson and begun to really understand him as a character. And the way I saw Ferguson, and this again is about my own sort of journey, thinking about, the sort of wider social meanings of football, I kind of felt that Ferguson was the John Prescott of the Premier League era. And I mean that in all the most positive ways about John Prescott, is that here is somebody who, from a working class background and without the sort of alchemy of higher education, has risen to the very top of the business that they're in and remained true culturally to the roots and to the place that they came from. And I think that's what Prescott was about in the New Labour universe, where there wasn't a lot of that. And I think for a lot of those, including myself, who had their doubts about the New Labour project, I mean, that's why he was there, to say, no, we're still connected in some way to working class life and working class values and the working class world that made the Labour Party in the first place. I mean, that didn't turn out so well, but there we go.
It's so grimly symbolic of football and the politics. that Ferguson ends up opening the door to the helping the opening the door to the Glazers. You know,
Well,
you couldn't get more symbolic than that, could you?
You know, opens the door and also sort of covers their trail in a way. I mean, it's only by force of his talent and ability and legacy that you know, United continue to win stuff, even though the Glazers from the beginning are the most hopeless, mean-spirited bunch of thieves masquerading as custodians of the club. And really, you know, United should have collapsed immediately, given the way that they ran it. But he, you know, he managed to smooth that over for almost a decade before his departure. So I think that's part of what attracted me. I think, like everybody else, and I actually do mean everybody else here, though many won't admit it, I found the whole class of '92 story a bunch of young lads who come through the ranks. I mean, does English football love anything more than, you know, kids coming through the ranks? And, you know, there you've got it in spades, you know, made even sweeter by Alan Hansen suggesting that you'll win nothing with kids at the beginning of, I think, the '96 season.
Famous last words.
And, you know, was there ever greater and more widespread and joyful Schadenfreude in English football when they won the title? So I was definitely attracted to that dimension of United's story, and you know, I'd learned enough and knew enough about the history of Manchester United and the European Cup by this point that, you know, it's all the echoes of the Busby years, the great long epic, you know, where winning the European Cup is, you know, that's what makes the myth, that's what makes the legend. And here I was sort of watching that process actually unfold in front of me. And I think that was made all the more so because I think, you know, United had not had, they were struggling. You know, they were dominant in English football. You know, they won by 99 4 of the first 6 Premier Leagues. Okay, they lost to Arsenal in 98, Blackburn in 94. But they were
lost to Woolwich.
Don't worry. You know, it's one of those Tottenham jokes that have gone past their sell-by date, but Tim and probably you will rinse it out for a few more years, yeah?
Well, we got to have something to laugh about at Tottenham. My God, give us all a break.
That's exactly why Shakespeare put Falstaff into Henry IV Part 1, 2, and a little bit of Henry V as well, to give you something to laugh at.
So I think that was, you know, that having actually, you know, watched them through the previous couple of seasons in Europe, and there was this sort of sense of them, you know, finding their way in a world that was actually outranking them.
That's how epic those wins against Inter and Juventus were, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Because this is still a time when we looked up to Italy, Serie A as being the king of the hill.
Absolutely. You know, it seemed impossible that they would be able to do that. So that gave it a kind of epic quest-like kind of quality that I was really enjoying. You know, I suppose hard not to like, you know, York and Cole. I just really enjoyed those guys, and I loved. I want to say Andy Cole, but I believe he prefers to be referred to these days as Andrew Cole. So I think we should say Andrew Cole. And
as we're the same way that we're banned from saying Dave Goldblatt, we have to say Andrew Cole
or Dave and Goliath.
So I was really enjoying those.
It wouldn't work though as David D, Beaky Dozy Mick and Titch, would it? That has to be Dave D.
There are moments for Dave.
The David Clark 5. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
There are moments for Dave in this world, just not in my presence on my book.
And we're not even talking about Davy yet. There's only place in the world for one Davy, and that was a monkey. So one of the monkeys, rather. Sorry.
Do you know, the funny thing is there used to be a really like an insane amount of Davids around, and I think we're
Yeah.
getting thinner on the ground.
Yeah.
Back in the Stone Age, I was a
blame it on the Welsh.
lecturer at the Open University, and in the politics department, we'd sit down sometimes and have a departmental meeting, and we'd have 6 out of 8 were David. Like,
So what do you think, Dave? No, I'm David. Sorry.
no
What
one
do you
would
think,
be
David?
Dave. Nobody, not one of them wanted to be Dave. So we all had to go by, it was all surnames and initials, David G and David H and all of that.
A mate of mine told me a story once. He's Stephen, and there were several Stephens at a party, or like 2 or 3 Stephens at a party, and he was the only one who was Stephen with a V.
Stevie V.
But all the others were much posher, you see.
There's only one David on the pitch, and that's David Beckham,
Oh,
who is forced because of the suspensions, because of Keane is out, Scholes is out. Honorary
Isn't
Dave. I think
David
we can
May
call him.
on the pitch though?
No, the back two. But Gary David Neville is at right back, and Dennis David Irwin is at left back. The centre back combination is Jaap Stam, who has never been a Dave, and Ronnie Johnson from Norway. And Ronnie Johnson, Mr. Goldblatt, sir, I know because I was there. Tottenham had him over for a trial in about 92. And I saw it. He played a game for the reserves. And I thought, sign him up. This fella's fantastic. He's great. And obviously, Tottenham being Tottenham, on your way, son. And here he is winning the European Cup with Man United.
Is David May on
we
the
did it
bench
again.
then?
Yeah, I think he must have been. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it may have been a UEFA quota. You can only have one Dave.
So I think the other thing that's going on for me at this moment is that I'm also starting to read a lot about football. I had my epiphany came in, I don't know whether it was like 93, 94, maybe it was even slightly earlier, but my friend Dan Levy, who is a diehard Arsenal supporter, season ticket holder forever, so focused on it. I mean, he was there for
the same Dan Levy, obviously.
Huh?
It's not the same Dan Levy, obviously.
A different Dan Levy.
Although it wouldn't surprise me.
But he prefers Daniel to Dan.
He prefers Dan. Dan is Daniel in his work life. This Dan Levy is a Daniel actually, but he's Dan to me. And one Saturday afternoon, he just called me up Saturday morning and said, "I've got a ticket for Arsenal, but at Charlton away game. Do you want to come?" And at this point,
surely that's point of order, sir. Surely that's a home game for Arsenal.
Come on, you've done the joke. Twice in the same podcast, Tim. Dear, oh dear.
I hadn't been to see a live game in a long time, and I just said, "Yeah, great, let's do it." So I come out of the station at Charlton, and what I realise in retrospect is this is the first football game I've been to with a PhD in sociology under my belt. And I look around waiting for Dan, and every sociological neuron in my brain explodes. It's like, oh my God, this is a form of ritual. This is structured, organised social action. Social identities are in play. There are all sorts of invisible rules here that I don't know, but everybody else does. And I was absolutely captivated. And then we go into the stadium and we're sitting in the funny little away bit for Arsenal fans. And at some point during the game, Perry Groves starts warming up off the bench. And inevitably, the Arsenal fans spontaneously break into "We All Live in a Perry Groves World" to the tune of Yellow Submarine. And I mean, I couldn't stop laughing, but I was also just so blown away by the fact that everybody knew exactly the moment to start singing simultaneously, and everybody knew the moment to stop. And I came away from that game thinking, I need to know more. And I'm already, it's not that I'm not watching football. This is early Premier League days. I've started going down the pub a bit to watch games and taking notice of it. Eric Cantona is the thing that's really kind of captivating me. I'm literally rushing home on a Saturday night to see Match of the Day because my old man's calling me going, have you seen what he's done today? And I started reading. This is the moment I really, really started reading. And in those days, there wasn't a kind of huge and extensive literature, but I'm covering all of that ground, and it's just opened a whole. It's like the scales have dropped from my eyes, and once they have, I can't stop seeing all of these social and historical and political connections. At the same time that I'm just loving it as a spectacle, I'm also, all of these things are going on for me. So watching football.
What was your relationship with it as a kid, and when did you drift away?
So I was a complete obsessive between the ages, I would say, of 5 and 8. I was the kind of kid, I don't know how many of them there were, but I used to sellotape together pieces of graph paper to make large graph paper kind of mats to put on my bedroom wall and plot Arsenal and Tottenham's relative league position on a week-by-week basis on a graph. I kid you not. And I'm memorizing, league tables, and I'm consuming every kind of football annual. And my old man is a Tottenham supporter. And in this era, he's working in the markets, coats and dresses. So Saturday is a work day. But midweek, that's his slot. And he, in a sort of like my relationship with Dan Levy, one of his oldest and closest friends, Stanley Ottolenghi, is a total Arsenal supporter. So they used to go and watch Arsenal together, and they used to go and watch Spurs together. And, this was the era. I mean, the peak was, I would say, the UEFA Cup final when 2 legs against Wolverhampton,
1972, yeah,
72, and they went to both legs of that, and that was a big deal in our house. So that's all going on. And I mean, we got a colour television for the first time for the 1970 World Cup final.
We got a black and white TV for the first time for the 1970 World Cup.
Right. It was amazing.
We got colour TV. We got a colour TV just in time for all my brother's mates who were Gooners to come round and watch Arsenal lose to Swindon Town in the League Cup final with Don Rogers scoring. Yeah. They came round, they put the Arsenal scarf all over our TV. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? And we're in Tottenham.
I love that.
There you go. Yeah.
So that's all going on. And obviously I'm begging the old man, take me to the game, take me to the game, take me to the game. And, obviously, I mean, as you know, things in English football, and especially at Tottenham games, are quite rough and quite chaotic and on occasion pretty violent. So obviously that's in the back of his mind. And he ends up taking me to an England-Scotland game as my first game at Wembley. And we lived in Ruislip, which is a suburb of North London. Wembley's down the road. So we go and see this England-Scotland game. And I actually, standard cliche, can't remember a bloody thing about the game. But boy, the moment that I emerged in the stadium and saw the rectangle of green and 100,000 people singing the national anthem, like, I'm sold. I'm so sold it's not true. Anyway, the old man decides in his wisdom that we're going to leave a bit before the final whistle. Have to say, never do that myself, consider it very sacrilegious. But anyway, and it was quite tricky in those days getting out of Wembley because, it's basically a huge car park around Wembley. It's just like wasteland. It's not like it is today. I mean, the Empire the leftovers from the Empire exhibition and all of that are there. But basically, it's a great big car park. So if
you can blame him for that. He's a member.
Okay, I will blame you.
I'm not that kind of member. Anyway, sorry, go on.
If you want to make a quick getaway, you need to get out. So off we go, and we're walking through the car park, and suddenly I sense change of mood, and I look up, and barring our way are 6 young Scottish gentlemen, all in the full tartan army regalia. And there I am in my innocence thinking, oh, is this the Bay City Rollers we have in front of me?
Shang-a-lang.
They're not moving. And my old man, I mean, I suspect looking back, they were probably like 16 or 17. And my old man looks at them and he says, right, well, you can have me, but 2 or 3 of you are going to fucking hospital. So who is fucking first? And the ways part. And he never went to football again.
Mm.
That was it. I mean, I think he was like heading in that direction anyway.
This is so similar to my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so similar. He just despised what it had become in the 70s. Despised it.
And he just, I mean, not that he stopped liking football,
Still loved it, but
totally engaged, but he was not going to and he sure as hell wasn't taking me to White Hart Lane. And, I'm fucked basically. I'm in Ruislip. It's a very long way. I'm 8 years, 9 years old. What are you going to do? I've got no older brother to take me, So I think it slightly cooled my ardor. And I then started, I was really bad at playing football and continue to be a very bad football player. But I was quite good at rugby. That became, that's what I did at school, both at primary and secondary school. And I never was not engaged. I was never stopped watching it. I never stopped looking for Tottenham's score on a Saturday. I mean, I can still remember, trying to revise for my medical exams at university in 1987 while listening to Tottenham lose the FA Cup final to Coventry. So
again,
it was always a thing. And then what brings me back, I mean, partly it was knowing Dan, and that re-engaged me. University friend, and his love of it kind of re-engaged me. And I think, like, everybody else, 1990 World Cup, we all fell in love with football. We all fell in love with England again. We all fell in love with Gaza, standard fare, I would say. And it's so in that frame of mind, I then have my experience at Charlton. And it's like everything, I'm so back.
What's your emotional state during this game? United against Bayern, 26th of May, 1999. United have conceded. Indeed, they've conceded early, and for a long. My lord, my liege, the game is drifting away from us. Yes. No, what's you're not involved as a United fan, but you want them to win, and they are drifting towards purely inevitable defeat.
I'm in a state of. I mean, I can. It's funny how memory plays tricks, but I sort of have a memory of myself from outside of myself, sort of like looking down from the ceiling, of me lying flat on the sofa. I've started sitting up, then I'm like this, and by like the mid-second half, I'm down. And I just remember this sort of sense of a sort of crushing weight of disappointment getting kind of heavier and heavier. And again, my memory is that although United are never out of the game, they haven't got real control. They're not getting a lot of great chances.
Chances are at the other end, aren't they?
Exactly. You're thinking 2-0, this is really, really all over. But yeah, and it's slightly, the sort of like tightness in the gut. Like I say, I'm all in. I'm all in here. And I think that's often how I am. I'm not a very tribal person when it comes to football. And a lot of people take obsessive tribalism and monomania as the gold standard of authenticity.
Yeah.
And I just do not buy that.
There are other ways to be into this, aren't there?
I mean, I think I'm slightly born out of time. In an earlier era, particularly when tickets were cheaper, it would be certainly here in Bristol. I know a lot of old boys who, went to City one week and then they went to Rovers the next week.
Yeah,
and there are
people
in Liverpool. Absolutely. You went to Everton one week, you went to Liverpool, and you might have a favourite between the two, right? But what you loved was football, and what you loved was your own city and the different ways in which that could be experienced and represented. You loved being in a crowd. I mean, all the millions and millions.
I think the building of the motorway network in the 50s and 60s has a lot to do with the end of that, because then you get the diehards going away much more, and that kind of starts a separation and a tribalism that you're right, it hadn't existed to that extent before.
And I'm like that today. I go and see City. I go and see Rovers. I'm going to go and see Rovers more, but I'm very happy to go and see City. And when I'm there, I pick sides and I'm all in. And that's how I was. That's how I was. I really, really, really wanted it. Felt really important that United win this game. I mean, maybe there was a sort of, a kind. I mean, patriotism is not quite the word I would use, but a sense that England and English football and the Premier League experiment are slightly on trial. It's like we're going on and on and on about how great the new era in football is. And meantime, we can't win in Europe. And of course, that again is that long, epic narrative story kicked out in 1985, the long gap. Finally, we're back. And boy, we really don't look too good. We've really, we've really fallen behind, I suppose, is the expression. And yeah, I want to see an English team win. I don't think I could feel like that today about Manchester United. I mean, there is a kind of innocence, when you look back, in the end, Martin Edwards, standard, slightly crap provincial businessman, with his meat company. But I kind of look back and go, oh, if only, compared to the sort of fuckers that we're having to deal with these days. And I could feel that way. And I felt that way about Manchester United and like its fan base, and I think this speaks to that, what I was saying about another era. And forgive me, I'm going to go slightly off piste here, but hang in with me because I think you'll be amused. I've been thinking about this for some time, and I was thinking about, I was writing actually about changes in dietary habits and the rise of nutritional science in football. And of course, the arrival of Wenger at Arsenal is the kind of key moment. We all know that. And I did think, let's go back and, what did footballers look like before that? Were they really actually fat? And of course, I thought of Mickey Quinn, Mickey Sumo Quinn, as he was often referred to. And as one does, down the YouTube rabbit hole, I find a video of every single Mickey Quinn goal for Coventry in the Premier League between, I think it's 92 and 94. Who puts these things up? Anyway, I'm deeply grateful that they did. And I watched it, and he was bloody good, actually. But what I really noticed, I looked at it and I thought, if you didn't know this was not the Premier League, we could be in the early 1980s here. Frankly, we could be in the early 1970s. These stadiums have not been rebuilt, right? You know, most of them have still got a whole bunch of terraces, even if they're not occupied. You know, occasionally, like St. James's Park looks just the way it did in the 1970s, except that the first new gigantic stand is rising up above the crowd. The pitches, oh my God, you know, they're absolutely swimming in mud, you know, to the point you really can't see the penalty spot. I love that, you know, the days when the penalty spot would actually disappear. And
the linesman would have to come on and paint it, wouldn't he?
Exactly. There'd be some sort of debate about, is it here? Is it there?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the crowd, and although, you know, ticket prices are inching up, and the end of the terraces has occurred, the crowd is really, and a few executive boxes have arrived in a few stadiums. It's basically the same crew that were there all the way through the 1980s. It's not that different. Demographically, still quite young, whereas today, as we know, the average age, Lord knows, I mean, it's got to be in the high 40s or early 50s, I would say, at a Premier League game. Very, very few people wearing replica shirts. And I noted that looking at the Man U Bayern final. There's not that many people in replica shirts, you know, whereas today it would just be a wall of branded goods of one kind or another. You know, they look like a bunch of old scallies. You know, it's still, there are definitely elements of the casual cultures of the 1980s in terms of dress and demeanor. I mean, it's still, of course, you know, very masculine. I mean, the presence, you know, compared to today, there are definitely fewer women. So it's pretty old school, you know, and it doesn't feel like, I didn't feel at the time, you know, Man U were basically a global corporation, though they're about to become that. I didn't feel that their crowd actually was the Prawn Sandwich Brigade, though they are going to become that. There's still something very much of the old order. And frankly, the new camp, you know, looks quite knackered. And I love the fact that there are no digital boards. I mean, sure, there's advertising, but it's not like the relentless double lines of constantly moving strobe-like advertising. You know, there's literally no UEFA branding. Whereas today, I mean, I was watching the City Madrid game last night. And I thought, you know, half the adverts on the boards, it's like strap lines from UEFA, that UCL feeling, nights you'll never forget. I mean, where the fuck do I throw up? You know, like, really? We need that from you, from UEFA? Like, we'll decide that, you know, not you. And I felt the same also about the big banner taking the piss out of Madrid over the whole Ballon d'Or thing with a picture of Rodri kissing it. And I thought, this is not the fans. This is a corporate banner. So you've not only colonized every other aspect of the game, but now you're colonizing kind of fan banter and tifos. Like, who the fuck are you? And that's not where we are in 1999.
You see, Don, I'm not the only one who works themselves up into rants over stuff like this.
I'm with you. I'm with you for most of that. Okay, so this is the second act, which is
and the third act. There's nothing more retro in terms of English football, was there?
3 minutes, isn't it? The third act.
Than winning the game from corners.
Oh, so great. So great. I mean, you know, and sort of slightly, you know, they're quite ugly, ungainly goals, aren't they? You know, they're sort of scrambled. They are. Yeah. There is a sense. I mean, I'd lifted myself in the final minutes from just kind of flat out despair I'd actually sat up again, you know, and it was like, come on, you know, that kind of, even though you know there's no hope and there's no point and there's no point saying it, you know, it's like, come on, you can do this thing. And then to actually see, you know, your fantasy delivered in front of you, because I didn't believe for a moment that was going to happen. And that's like, I mean, that's one of the mind-blowing things about football, isn't it? When shit like that.
You see, you didn't take the advice of the Manchester United squad song that was in the charts called "Lift It High," open brackets. It's all about belief. Close brackets.
Absolutely shocking, I'm telling you.
It was really interesting, Tim, that you mentioned that, because I looked at the charts, and I realised, you know, in young parenthood and, like, you know, how old am I at this point? I'm in my sort of mid-30s. I looked at that chart and it was like, I literally, not only do I not know these songs, I would say there are only about 4 or 5 of the artists. Actually,
I'm the same age. We've just got to that point where we're too old for all of this, don't we? You know?
Exactly. And it was like, oh, this is, I don't know this territory. This is,
but it's
like,
it's also a lightweight chart for a lightweight age, isn't it?
Yeah, there are 1 or 2 bangers there.
Sure.
You know, by bangers I mean ones.
Defend yourself.
Well, before I get to that defence,
Professor, you want to get to the defence of Kufuor, don't you, and his lack of defence.
I'm coming on to I'm coming on to the defence, I promise you. But Professor, the idea that football and music tell a comparative narrative about society. You know, you mentioned 1999, and you can see the cultural aspects of 1999, even from the kits that the footballers are wearing or the shirts that the fans are not wearing. There is a sense that music tells a similar narrative. You kind of know where you are, not if you have left the music scene, as it were, and dedicated your life to football entirely, but there is a parallel narrative even when you come to football chants, isn't there? That, you know, you start from a basis. A football chant, for example, is something that's very organic. You know, you're there. I know the Bard of Barnsley, as he calls himself, Michael Macmillan, tells the story of how he's in the ground one day and they've got a footballer. You know, they're in whatever championship maybe, and they've got, maybe they're in the first division even, but they've got a footballer who just like dribbles through the opposition's central spine. And then somebody amongst the Barnsley fans shouts out, "It's just like watching Brazil." And somebody else picks up from that and says, "It's just like watching Brazil. It's just like watching Brazil." And
exactly an accent. That's exactly the perfect accent for Barnsley. You've done very well.
It's a Nigerian that lived in, well, he didn't quite live in Barnsley, but he was there for a moment or two. But I would say the number one song, it's forgotten now, but it was a real big dance hit. And my missus is kind of not a million miles away from this, because after this, they were looking for a follow-up hit, Shanks and Bigfoot with Sweet Like Chocolate. They were looking for a follow-up hit, and they started doing some songwriting with my missus. Nothing came out of it, but it should have been a follow-up to that. And that's what makes them a one-hit wonder. I think Shania Twain's That Don't Impress Me Much is a half-decent, you know, country-based rock tune, but nevertheless,
it's a nice twist on country, isn't it? You know,
Indeed.
A kind of neo-country song, having a dig at kind of mansplaining.
And that's a number 3. That's at number 3. And the other tune in the charts that is just, it's going to live for a long time is No Scrubs by TLC. Even though
What's
TLC,
a scrub? I never worked that one out.
You see, it's one of those geezers who really isn't really what we used to call Topper Norris. You know, he's not the big cheese he makes out he is. So he has to, you know, lend his best friend's car to style it out. I don't even think in the song he's lending his best friend's car. He's just a passenger in his best friend's car. So his best friend is driving, you know, a Merc or whatever it is, and he's like in the passenger seat, sort of like whistling at all the girls. That's a scrub, yeah. So she don't want no scrubs. But it has lasted, it has lasted the passage of time, that one, and I think it will be there for a long, long time, in my humble opinion. And it's not the other one, the only one. So you go from the top 10, you've got to go way down now to number 24 with Britney Spears' "Baby One More Time." I know in the modern context there might be issues with certainly the video, I think. And if you want to look at a kind of the context of the song from an sadomasochistic perspective, you can do that. I'm not sure necessarily that's the way to look at the song, but "Baby One More Time," it's used almost as a somewhat repetitive theme in adverts and so on nowadays, and I think that will be here for some time at number 24. And then you're going to go way, way, way down now for my name is Slim Shady. Although the song itself, and that is Eminem's first hit under Dr. Dre's guidance, although the song itself may not be his most famous one, I certainly think that was eclipsed by not least "Lose Yourself," but "Stand" probably. It launched this white rapper into the world, and he wasn't the first white rapper out there, but he was the first to get the props properly, because I think before that they'd had Third Base, half decent Third Base, Pete Nice, and the Prime Minister Pete Nice. I can't remember what the other guy's name was. And then of course you'd had the Beastie Boys, who were in the charts, not with a memorable song at all, but nevertheless they've been in the landscape. They're at number 21 with Remote Control. And sorry, I'll finish my sort of defense of the charts in just a moment. There are a couple of things that let me just pull up as we go along, that are worth a moment of consideration at least. Can't find them now. Here we go. Nope, there's nothing else in the charts that's worth a moment of consideration in that case, because I certainly can't find it. But I've given you a handful of things there to ruminate. Oh, X Factor, Lauryn Hill. That's what I was going to go for.
All right, yeah, it's
amazing album. Amazing
yeah,
album. Miseducation of Lauryn Hill.
It's a great song as well.
92 on the way down. So apart from that, the rest of the charts is rubbish in my view.
Well, there are still things that are worth. I mean, one that stands out for me, not because I like it, is Nas with Puff,
Nas.
which is Nas. What did Winston Churchill call him? A Nazi. Hate Me Now. And why that stands out, I think, is that we're now more than 30 years on from Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. We're a winner. And We're a Winner has gone. We're a Winner has gone. It's now me. The money I make, the girls I attract, me. Hate me now, don't matter, because I've got lots of money and I've got lots of girls, and me. And this seems to be entirely in accord with what we were saying earlier on about the whole shallowness of the football and the whole new Labour era, because the idea of the collective progress has been replaced with the idea of the individual progress.
But not at Manchester United, and not for Alex Ferguson. I mean, I think that's partly again what attracted.
Football players can't win on their own, do they? They've got to have a team.
It's a team. It's team. No one was too big at Manchester United, for Ferguson to kick them out. Beckham became too commercialised, out. Yap Stam, whatever the issue was with like what he said in his biography, that's a kind of contested thing. I mean, who would get rid of Yap Stam? It wasn't like he was old, but he wasn't fully with the programme, and that's what matters. Ferguson's United. Not that the man didn't have an ego, right? I'm not sanctifying him, but a sense truly of a collective project that, there is something bigger in this world than any one individual. And I really felt that was what was going on in that Manchester United team in that era. And that is commendable. That's one of the things I like. That's what I want in my football. I want, I want to see great teams. I want to see, it's about collective action. And it's amazing to see it, you know, made flesh.
But
And I think,
that's one thing which has gone from music, because now you can make music in a bedroom on your own, whereas before you were always dependent on the band format to do it. And I think music has suffered as a consequence, because so many of the bands, I mean, Lennon and McCartney, or Ronnie Lane and Steve Marriott together, they're so much better than they were when they were apart, because the personalities, one brings out something in the other.
But then you can find artists who were so much better on their own than when they were in a band. George Michael might be one person, even though I would argue that his best song was written as Wham, but as an artist,
but Wham was him anyway, wasn't it? Really, it was
well,
him.
you say that, but it was also a juvenile him. He became a lot more mature,
Yeah.
and his music got a lot better.
Agreed.
I think, though, Tim, the fact that you can make music in your bedrooms now, you could always do it. You could always have done it, but there were people telling us, no, you can't do it. You have to record it in the studio. And
you didn't have the technology to do it on your own.
Of course you did. Of course you did. You had tape record. People had reel-to-reel tape recorders back in those days.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't standard. Not everybody had a reel-to-reel, but you were just able to get access to a reel-to-reel. The best Buddy Holly tapes are the Buddy Holly tapes that were released posthumously. I don't even think they were released immediately. They were released in the last 20 or 30 years, of him sitting in his New York apartment with just his guitar and reel-to-reel tape, working out, the transition from being the Tex-Mex rocker to being a sort of a New York orchestral pop singer, if you like, a Neil Sedaka or something like that, or whoever it was at the time that was similar to him. I think you could always do. When I first started a band, I just thought, oh well, the only way that you can put out a single is if you've got the money to go into a studio at 20 quid an hour, and you're looking at the clock all the way. Okay, let's speed up that drum thing now. We're running out of time. They told you, they owned the landscape, because they said, look, you can't release a record unless it's like this. What changed, particularly with punk, but now the evolution of the technology, you're quite right, has got to the point where anybody can do something now. They can't quite win the Champions League. They can, they can sort of be in the mix, as it were, but they're not. Doesn't mean that they're really, really artists, real creative artists. Some will be, because some will learn that game, as well as the Lennon and McCartneys learned the game of sitting in a. And I tell you, rehearsals in those days, I had a rehearsal room with the band. It wasn't me that got the rehearsal room. It was the most disgusting place. First of all, it was beneath. It was either beneath. It was a cellar, but it was either beneath or next door and beneath to a cinema, so we could hear the cinema. Hopefully, they couldn't hear us, but there was some kind of communication thing with the technology that we could hear the cinema. But it was also a complete tip, and there were, sometimes we shared it with another band, and sometimes they'd go for a Mickey D's opposite, and then they'd leave the remains in there. So we didn't really have mice or rats, not that I saw, but we had flies, the size of which I've never seen before in my life. They're just sitting there eating our leftovers. It wasn't a nice, creative place.
I think there's one thing, what you're saying makes me think, is that although the new technologies are atomizing in some ways for musical cultures, I think we forget how much in certain spaces there is a community of musicians. I mean, if you think about grime and drill and rap and the collectivity of musicians and rappers and singers, and that people are doing sound clashes and doing competitions, and it's a community where people are in dialogue with each other about their work. So I think even though people are probably recording stuff, very much individually at home electronically, there is a wider community of musical talent out there. And I think that's, I don't know about you guys, but that's, I think, some of the most interesting cultural commentary and referencing of football in modern Britain is actually in the grime and the drill scene. I mean, a lot of other musicians are not really, they want to sponsor football clubs and put their labels on the shirts, but actually engaging with it, not much outside of that. I mean, Stormzy's always going on about David Moyes as a kind of symbol of disaster and chaos.
Well, funny enough, I would say the similarity between modern British music and modern British football support is that you go, well, not just modern, but since time immemorial, you go to the event. This is where the creativity happens, on the day, as it were. So when you go to gigs, the most important thing in musical evolution is live gigs. It's the only way. I've seen Rodigan at a session. I'll tell you one thing about Rodigan. Rodigan's playing tunes and he's watching the crowd. He's like, are they moving to this tune? Because that's going to influence his next move. Just like a football team, where you watch where the opposition is. Okay, I've moved this way. If I drag the defender over this way, in that case, there's that space over there. He's watching. You're watching all the time to see where the next evolution is going to happen. And Bristol, funny enough, where you reside, David, was one of the places that I remember in the old sound system reggae scene. It used to be big, and I couldn't understand why. There used to be a club there called the Bamboo Club. It was run by a white guy with his black wife. Can't remember his name. Tony something was it. Last seen traveling the world solo in a boat that got overturned or capsized in the Southern Ocean, but he survived. He survived with the Tony Bullimore, I think that was his name. He survived after the amputation of 2 or 3 toes that got frostbite. But he had one of those boats where there's a pocket which you can survive for a few days, even in a frozen ocean. But anyway, he ran this club called the Bamboo Club. Bob Marley played there. A little old club in Bristol. Well, the Wailers, I should say, played there rather than Bob Marley, and that became a kind of a hub, if you like, in the St Paul's district of Bristol for what was to come next in reggae throughout Britain. It became part of the hub. It became part of the conversation. So it wasn't just about London. It wasn't just about Birmingham with the likes of the Handsworth Crew. St Paul's, there was one of the best reggae bands out of Britain. It was called Black Roots, and they're from St Paul's. They didn't hit big time.
Actually, aren't they?
They may still be. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think they're still going. And
did
you ever go to a bar sort of underground called Cozy's? Was that part of the scene when you were coming to Bristol?
I don't remember that. I don't remember Cozy's
for reggae music, and for a long time it was the one place you could go in Bristol and roll a joint up publicly in a bar and smoke it, and no one.
Don't do that at home, folks. But isn't it funny though? Because you see, Sim, this is where the conversation for me leads to. From those early roots, what emerged in Bristol was their own sound, their own take on reggae and dancehall and what later became house, I suppose, early on. So they then were the foundations to Soul to Soul. Because Soul to Soul is made up of the Wild Bunch, who are all Bristolians. And that emerged as a kind of a way of showing the Americans, we can do what you do as well. We've got our own British take on it. So all of these things, technology enables it to happen, but you're not going to fight the technology. You can look at Elon Musk and cuss him as much as you like. The first thing you're thinking is, his son just told reporters to shut their mouths in the Oval Room. His 6 or 7-year-old son can't do a thing about it. So would you still, does his place in history change now because he is a pain in the butt for a lot of people? Well, no.
I don't think it's the pain in his butt is that he's part of a executive coup. I think that's what's going to change.
You could argue that.
Change the take. I have to say, the first thing I think of when I look at Elon Musk these days is how much ketamine are you taking?
Allegedly. But look, I don't know.
Free speech, free
I know,
speech, free
I know,
speech, free
I
speech.
know,
It's the Gulf of America. Free speech.
I
It's the
know
Gulf of America.
it is the full Gulf of America for him.
Free speech.
I know from somebody who spent a weekend at his house that yeah, he smokes a lot of weed, but then that's a California thing to do nowadays. I don't even think people bat an eyelid at that.
Is it
over
a
in
South
California.
African thing to do? Is there anything in this chart from '99 that David Goldblatt was into at the time, or has subsequently got into?
Do you know what? I couldn't. I mean, almost nothing. I looked in vain. I mean,
Almost
I think
nothing.
at this point I've embarked. Basically, all I'm listening to is jazz. Really, at this point,
Good
I've
for you.
kind of got to that point, which happens to old men, as far as I can see.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Yeah.
Old men at 35. Maybe you, not me.
I finally made sense of John Coltrane, and
Oh,
it was
well
like,
done.
I really can't
Yeah.
listen to anything else.
It is hard.
There was a few years earlier. I mean, it was one of the greatest gigs I've ever been to. About 92, 93. The Jazzmatazz thing, the Guru, and that first tour when he had Donald Byrd and so on. And I remember being at and just being absolutely ecstatic with this. And I thought this was going to be the future. I thought that kind of jazz hip hop thing, this is where we're going to go, and it's going to be great. And I'm so disappointed that never really happened. Although very grateful for the stuff in that time that did happen.
What really happened is they tried to take it pop with the Dream Warriors, as I remember. There were UK groups like Us Three who were still on it for years and years and years.
That's just too much pure sampling, isn't it? That's not. There wasn't enough great stuff new there. And
maybe
there's
in
one
terms of Dream Warriors.
I keep meaning for you to play it on the World Football Phone in the Diggable Planets.
Yeah, I remember.
Rebirth of the Split. I thought, fucking brilliant.
Those guys, I absolutely love, and I still love that first album. I often find myself playing it. I think it's so fantastic, so playful, so emotionally kind of complex, and so generous in its emotions. I think that's what I really love about it so much. So much rap, is rightly fucking angry, and there's a place for that. I mean, I say as an old punk, there's really a place for that.
Just on that, there's the New Radicals. You get what you give, and it's got a kind of sweet to it. It's not really my stuff. It's got a sweet to it, but it does have the line, "Every night I smash up a Mercedes Benz," and you need a little bit of that in music, don't you?
Yeah, not if you drive a Merc, obviously, but yeah. Look, as we're coming to the end of this, you said there's almost nothing in the charts.
Apparently, nothing. Apparently,
well, that was a good track, even though it was mostly sampled and stuff. But nevertheless, is there? If you had to choose one track of all the tracks in this chart, one that you can sort of live with, you have to choose one. Yes.
I'll have to call up the chart, dude. One sec.
Okay.
Let me call up the.
am I the only one who bothers to write this down on pen and paper?
No,
I'm the only one who does this.
No, I'm in pen and paper. Yeah, you are the only one.
Yeah, with little notes alongside all the tracks. Am I the only one who does this?
It's technology, mate. We moved on.
Okay, I'm having a look. Well, definitely not Jerry Halliwell.
I think there's an interesting attempt to try and make her an English Madonna at this point.
She was shit, though. She's not on Madonna's
album. That one probably
Yeah, look at me there.
Okay, I'm now down in.
She's like,
I mean, I suppose I can still, if I'm sufficiently loved up, I could listen to a bit of Fatboy Slim.
It's not his best though. It's not his best, but yeah.
Not a huge fan of the Super Furry Animals, but their relationship to Welsh football kind of keeps me interested in those guys.
Fair point.
Steps, Boyzone, I don't think so.
No, I didn't think so either.
again, you know, sufficiently loved up on some sort of Class A, I could probably listen to the Happy Mondays. Not
It's a terrible
Not
version.
this one though. Yeah, this one is bad.
Terrible.
This one is not good. I can't be honest.
This one is surely it's one they were pissing around with doing rehearsals and they didn't have anything else. So why don't we release that?
Yeah, exactly.
The boys are back in town, the old Thin Lizzy song.
Dear, oh dear.
I noticed Madonna is in the charts. My God, Blondie seems to be in the charts at number 80.
Texas number 34 in our lifetime. Do you fancy that? Or Secret?
They just pass me by. Okay,
it's got to be Whitney. It's got to be Whitney Houston. It ain't right, but it's okay. It's got to be. It's the class act in the field.
Again, I mean, 87, Van Morrison back on top. I seem to, wasn't it a bit of a sort of comeback album where he did a bunch of collaborations? I can't, you know, bless him. I mean, he's gone a bit down the rabbit hole, but I've still got a lot of affection for early Van Morrison. And similarly, you know, Lauren, I mean, I suppose Lauryn Hill from the Misadventures of Lauryn Hill at 92 is probably about, that's definitely, that album has definitely stayed with me.
Well,
so I'm going to go Lauryn Hill is my pick.
X Factor at number 92 on the way down, and that's it from us.
But hang on, one moment. I think
got one more.
We have a question from Deli Alley in Louisville, and there it is. Mr. Goldblatt, sir, do you look back on the football culture in the UK in the 90s with nostalgia or with contempt?
Oh, well, definitely nostalgia. I mean, contempt. Why would we? I can't see any reason to be contemptuous.
I think maybe if you take it back into the 70s and 80s, then I think contempt, because it was authentic, but then the racism was just absolutely rampant, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
by the 90s, some of that's cleaned up.
That's a very strong. It's a very strong word. I mean, I look back on English football of the 70s and 80s in the same way that I look back on English society. I mean, you know, there were lots of things that were actually really great about it, but of course it was like unbelievably racist and sexist and homophobic. And I sort of see both. I don't approve, but I don't sort of I couldn't be only contemptuous of the past. I try. I think the most important thing as a historian is probably to be neither, but to be clear-eyed, and that's. I hope that's the way that I see it. But yeah, there's a touch of nostalgia. I mean, how can you not? You know, I'm touching 60, guys. So, like,
you and me both.
Well,
this is quite some time ago.
One of us has touched it, embraced it, lives with it, and can tell you all about it on another occasion. Daniel,
the dreadlocks at 60 would have been. Yeah, I think you've done well to lose the dreadlocks.
Yeah, there comes time. Definitely comes time.
And by the way, the song is not Dreadlocks at 60, it's Dreadlocks in Moonlight. But still, just some homework for you. Yeah, thanks, Daniel in Louisville, the first person to have sent us a question live and direct on YouTube. We'll do this again. David, it's been absolutely amazing. Yeah, let's do it again. The book is The Ball is Round. It's a global history of football. It's 1,000 pages and counting, or no, just under 1,000 pages, if I'm correct. And Tim's dropped it on his foot, so he can tell you all about how painful that can be. Let us all three. When shall we three meet again? Says William Shakespeare. Yeah. Whatever. Let's do it again. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about the Champions League final, 26th of May, 1999, Man United versus Bayern Munich. And the one question I said, don't forget to remind me about.
Yeah.
Core 4 at the end.
Thank you. Well, let me just say, it was very. I know we're going back 26 years. But it was, I wasn't used to seeing black men cry on television. Okay, I wasn't used to it. It happened for the first time, I think, when Princess Diana died. Was that in 97?
Yeah.
And when she died, and the newspapers, you might remember there was like about 2 weeks of mourning on the television screens every single day. The cameras were at Kensington Palace with the bunches, many hundreds and thousands of bunches of flowers in remembrance of her. And basically, after a while, the journalists get tired of asking, Middle England, how you feeling about this? So they get a couple of black guys and they're literally crying. No disrespect. That was the first time I'd ever seen black men cry on television. I know it sounds a little bit puny now, but when I saw Kufuor sit down on the ground, actually crying from this, I felt contempt, disgust, and no disrespect to him, because nothing against it. I just thought, when you've never seen it before, it's like the first time I got on a bus and there was a female bus driver. I remember it so clearly, and I thought, I better hang on tight here. I know. That was about 40 years ago.
You lot who went to boys' schools.
Exactly.
I despair sometimes.
Men aren't supposed to cry, whether you go to boys' schools or otherwise. And my old man told me that. So on that note, thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun. It's been really interesting. I never would have looked at the 1999 chart without you. So
we're sorry. We're sorry.
Apologies. Time you will never get back in your life, I'm afraid. But it was worth it.